Starting now.
Black Clock Audio Tales, May 2019, Hawaiian Folklore and Legends, edited by Daniel Spitzer, music by Kevin MacLeod. Help the show by sharing, rating, liking, or 5-star giving wherever you listen to or rate podcasts. Support the show by hitting the Patreon button on pgttcm.podbean.com or by going to paypal.me/pgttcm, and don't forget to visit pgttcm.com. Brought to you by BunnySlippers.com. Check out their new Dino Sound Slippers. Is that the name? They roar every third step. Very cool.
By Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC. The Legends and Myths of Hawaii by King David Kalakau. Kalavari, Chief of Puna. Between Cape Kumahaki, the extreme eastern point of the island of Hawaii, and the great lava flow of 1840, which burst forth apparently from a long subterranean channel, connecting with the crater Kilauea, and went down to the sea at Nanawale over villages and groves of palms, is a small historic district, which, notwithstanding the repeated volcanic disturbances with which it has been convulsed in the past, the chasms with which it has been rent, and the smoke and ashes that have shut out the light of the sun and driven its people to the protection of their temples, still possesses many fertile nooks and natural attractions. Within a few miles of each other, not far inland, are a number of extinct craters, but the rains are abundant in Puna, and spring is eternal, and the vegetation grows rank above hidden patches of lava, and is constantly stretching and deepening its mantle of green over the vitreous rivers of Kilauea and the lower and lesser volcanic vents, clinging to its base like so many cauterized ulcers. The valleys are green in that part of Puna now, and there the banana and breadfruit grow, and the ohia and pineapple scent the air. But so has it not always been, for the mango ripens over fields of buried lava, and the palms grow tall from the refilled chasms of dead streams of fire. The depression of Kapoho, now sweet with tropical odors, marks the site of a sunken mountain, and where today sleep the quiet waters of a lake once boiled a sea of liquid lava, in a basin broader, perhaps, than the mighty cauldron of Kilauea. We are now to speak of one of the many eruptions at which the intervals in the past poured their desolating torrents of fire through the district, alternately loved and hated by Pele, the dreadful goddess of the volcanoes. In connection with it, tradition has brought down a tale combining elements of simplicity and grandeur, strikingly characteristic of the mythological legends of Polynesia. Legends equaling the Norse in audacity, but lacking the motive and connecting causes of the Greek. They are simply legendary epics, beginning in caprice and abruptly ending, in many instances, in grandest tumult. They are like chapters torn from a lost volume, patches of disturbed elements and gigantic forms and energies clandestinely cut from a passing panorama and placed in the foreground of strange and inharmonious conditions. They embrace gods, reminding us of Thor, monsters more hideous than Polyphemus, demigods mighty as the son of Thetis, and kings with strains reaching back to the loins of gods. But in motive and action they were independent of, and not unfrequently hostile to, each other. No celestial synod shaped their course or moved them to effort, and to no authority higher than their individual wills were they usually responsible. Many of them were created with no reference to the necessity of their being or the maintenance of divine respect or authority, and not a few seem to have been the creations of accident. As an example, the demigod Maui may be mentioned. As told by tradition, his principal abode was Hawaii, although his facilities for visiting the other islands of the group will be considered ample when it is stated that he could step from one to another, even from Oahu to Kauai, a distance of 70 miles. When he bathed, and bathing was one of his greatest delights, his feet trod the deepest basins of the ocean, and his hair was moistened with the vapor of the clouds. Neither his creator nor the purpose of his creation is mentioned, but he was blessed with a wife with proportions, it is presumed, somewhat in keeping with his own, and as an evidence of their attachment, it is related that at one time he reached up and seized the sun, and held it for some hours motionless in the heavens, to enable his industrious spouse to complete the manufacture of a piece of kapa upon which she was engaged. And Kana was another gigantic being of similar proportions. He too was partial to Hawaii, and could step from island to island, and frequently stood for his amusement, with one foot on Oahu and the other either on Maui or Kauai. Tradition may have confounded these two monsters, but as Kana was wifeless, we are constrained to regard them as distinct, and being without the care of a wife, he was enabled to devote his entire attention to himself and the inhabitants of the islands, crawling at his feet. Hence, when the king of Kahiki, who was the keeper of the sun, shut its light from the Hawaiians for some trivial offense, Kana waded the ocean to the home of the vindictive monarch, and by threats compelled him to restore the light to the Hawaiian group. This done, he waded back and hung his mantle to dry on Mauna Kea, which was then an active volcano. Another demigod of the same name is also referred to in some of the early meles of Hawaii. He was the son of Hina, who went with his brother to the rescue of their mother, who had been during their infancy abducted by the son of the king of Molokai. He was endowed by his grandmother, a sorceress from one of their southern islands, with the faculty of so elongating and contracting his person as to be able to pass through the deepest waters with his head at all times above the surface. The shadows of these and other monsters are seen far back in the past, but human beings of gigantic proportions, of natural birth and claiming no connection with the gods, are mentioned in Hawaiian folklore as having lived as late as the beginning of the 16th century. Thus, during the reign of Umi, king of Hawaii, whose romantic ascent to the throne is the theme of chant and song, and to whom the past and present dynasties of United Hawaii trace their descent, lived the giant Mokaleo. He was one of Umi's warriors, and must have been a mighty host in himself. His measure in feet is not recorded, but he stood upon the ground and plucked coconuts from the tallest trees, and once, without wetting his loins, strode out into 6 fathoms of water and saved the life of his chief. As the traditions relating to Umi are quite elaborate and circumstantial, the existence of Makaleo can well be doubted, however greatly we may feel disposed to curtail his proportions. But in groping among these monsters of the Hawaiian past, we have been led somewhat from the story of the eruption in Puna, to which reference has been made. However, as pertinent to it, and to the goddess whose wrath invoked it, it may be mentioned that many centuries ago, a family of gods and goddesses came to Hawaii from Tahiti and took possession of the volcanic mountains of that island. The family consisted of 5 brothers and 9 sisters, of which Pele was the principal deity. The others possessed specific powers and functions, such as controlling the fires, smoke, steam, explosions, etc., of the volcanoes under their supervision. Although they frequently dwelt in other volcanoes, their principal and favorite abode was the crater of Kilauea. Almost without exception, they were destructive and merciless. Temples were erected to Pele in every district menaced by volcanic disturbance, and offerings of fruits, animals, and sometimes of human beings were laid upon her altars and thrown into the crater to secure her favor or placate her wrath. In the legend of the apotheosis of Pele, a more extended reference is made to the goddess and her family. With this knowledge of the power and disposition of Pele, the reader will be prepared for the story of the exhibition of her wrath in Puna, which will now be related nearly in the language of tradition. The event occurred during the reign of Kahu-Kapu, who, from about 1340 to 1380, was the Ali Nui, or governing chief, of Hawaii. The chief of the district of Puna was Kahavari, a young noble distinguished for his strength, courage, and manly accomplishments. How he came to be chief or governor of Puna is not stated. As his father and sister lived in Oahu, he was probably a native of that island, and may have been advanced to his position through military service rendered the Hawaiian king, since it was customary in those days, as it was at later periods, for young men of martial tastes to seek adventure and employment at arms with the kings and chiefs of neighboring islands. The grass-thatched mansion of the young chief was near Kapoho, where his wife lived with their 2 children, Paupohu and Kahui and Kuki. No great distance away dwelt his old mother, then on a visit to her distinguished son. As his taro lands were large and fertile, and he had fish ponds on the seashore, he entertained with prodigality, and the people of Puna thought there was no chief like him in all Hawaii. It was at the time of the monthly festival of Lono. The day was beautiful. The trade winds were bending the leaves of the palms and scattering the spray from the breakers, chasing each other over the reef. A holua contest had been announced between the stalwart young chief and his favorite friend and companion, Ahua, and a large concourse of men, women, and children had assembled at the foot of the hill to witness the exciting pastime. They brought with them drums, bohis, ukuleles, rattling gourds, and other musical instruments. And while they awaited the coming of the contestants, all frolicked as if they were children, frolicked as was their way before the white man came to tell them they were nearly naked, and that life was too serious a thing to be frittered away in enjoyment. They ate ohayas, coconuts, and bananas under the palms, and chewed the pith of sugar cane. They danced, sang, and laughed at the hula and other sports of the children, and grew nervous with enthusiasm when their bards chanted the meles of bygone years. The game of holua consists in sliding down a sometimes long but always steep hill on a narrow sledge from 6 to 12 feet in length, called a papa. The light and polished runners, bent upward at the front, are bound quite closely together with crossbars for the hands and feet. With a run at the top of the sliding track, slightly smoothed and sometimes strewn with rushes, the rider throws himself face downward on the narrow papa and dashes headlong down the hill. As the sledge is no more than 6 or 8 inches in width, with more than as many feet in length, one of the principal difficulties of the descent is in keeping it under the rider. The other, of course, is in guiding it, but long practice is required to master the subtleties of either. Kahaveri was an adept with the papa, and so was Ahua. Rare sport was therefore expected, and the people of the neighborhood assembled almost in a body to witness it. Finally appearing at the foot of the hill, Kahaveri and his companion were heartily cheered by the good-natured auditors. Their papas were carried by attendants. The chief smiled upon the assemblage, and as he struck his tall spear into the ground and divested his broad shoulders of the kihei covering them, the wagers of fruit and pigs were 3 to 1 that he would reach the bottom first, although Ahua was expert with the papa, and but a month before had beaten the champion of cow on his own ground. Taking their sledges under their arms, the contestants laughingly mounted the hill with firm, strong strides, neither thinking of resting until the top was gained. Stopping for a moment preparatory to the descent, a comely-looking woman stepped out from behind a clump of undergrowth and bowed before them. Little attention was paid to her until she approached still nearer and boldly challenged Kahaveri to contest the hula with her instead of Ahua. Exchanging a smile of amusement with his companion, the chief scanned the lithe and shapely figure of the woman for a moment, and then exclaimed, more in astonishment than in anger, "What, with a woman? And why not with a woman, if she is your superior and you lack not the courage?" was the calm rejoinder. "You are bold, woman," returned the chief, with something of a frown. "What know you of the papa?" "Enough to reach the bottom of the hill in front of the chief of Puna," was the prompt and defiant answer. "Is it so indeed? Then take the papa, and we will see," said Kahaveri, with an angry look which did not seem to disturb the woman in the least. At a motion from the chief, Ahua handed his papa to the woman, and the next moment Kahaveri, with the strange contestant closely behind him, was dashing down the hill. On they went, around and over rocks, at breakneck speed, but for a moment the woman lost her balance, and Kahaveri reached the end of the course a dozen paces in advance. Music and shouting followed the victory of the chief, and scowling upon the exultant multitude, the woman pointed to the hill, silently challenging the victor to another trial. They mounted the hill without a word and turned for another start. "Stop," said the woman, while a strange light flashed in her eyes. "Your papa is better than mine. If you would act fairly, let us now exchange." "Why should I exchange?" replied the chief hastily. "You are neither my wife nor my sister, and I know you not. Come." And presuming the woman was following him, Kahavari made a spring and dashed down the hill on his papa. With this the woman stamped her foot, and a river of burning lava burst from the hill and began to pour down into the valley beneath. Reaching the bottom, Kahavari rose and looked behind him, and to his horror saw a wide and wild torrent of lava rushing down the hillside toward the spot where he was standing, and riding on the crest of the foremost wave was the woman, now no longer disguised, but Pele, the dreadful goddess of Kilauea, with thunder at her feet and lightning playing with her flaming tresses. Seizing his spear, Kahavari, accompanied by Ahuna, fled for his life to the small eminence of Pukea. He looked behind and saw the entire assemblage of spectators engulfed in a sea of fire. With terrible rapidity, the valleys began to fill, and he knew that his only hope of escape was in reaching the ocean, for it was manifest that Pele was intent upon his destruction. He fled to his house, and passing it without stopping, said farewell to his mother, wife, and children, and to his favorite hog, Alopua, telling them that Pele was in pursuit of him with a river of fire, and to save themselves, if possible, by escaping to the hills. He left them to their fate. Coming to a chasm, he saw Pele pouring down it to cut off his retreat. He crossed on his spear, pulling his friend over after him. At length, closely pursued, he reached the ocean. His brother, discovering the danger, had just landed from his fishing canoe and gone to look after the safety of his family. Kahavari leaped into the canoe with his companion, and using his spear for a paddle, was soon beyond the reach of the pursuing lava. Enraged at his escape, Pele ran some distance into the water and hurled after him huge stones that hissed as they struck the waves, until an east wind sprang up and carried him far out to sea. He first reached the island of Maui, and thence, by the way of Lanai, found his way to Oahu, where he remained to the end of his days. All of his relatives in Puna perished, with hundreds of others in the neighborhood of Kapuhu, but he never ventured back to Puna, the grave of his hopes and his people, for he believed Pele, the unforgiving, would visit the place with another horror if he did. Pele had come down from Kilauea in a pleasant mood to witness the hula contest, but Kahavari angered her unwittingly, and what followed has just been described. End of chapter 31. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC. Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC. The Legends and Myths of Hawaii by King David Kalakaua. Kalalapuna, the Princess of Manoa, a legend of the Valley of the Rainbow. Manoa is the most beautiful of all the little valleys, leaping abruptly from the mountains back of Honolulu, and cooling the streets and byways of the city with their sweet waters. And it is also the most verdant. Gentle rains fall there more frequently than in the valleys on either side of it, and almost every day in the year it is canopied with rainbows. Sometimes it is called, and not inappropriately, the Valley of Rainbows. Why is it that Manoa is thus blessed with rains, thus ornamented with rainbows, thus cradled in everlasting green? Were a reason sought among natural causes, it would doubtless be found in a favoring rent or depression in the summit above the valley, overlooking the eastern coast of Oahu, where the wind and rain are abundant. But tradition furnishes another explanation of the exceptionally kind dealings of the elements with Manoa, not as satisfactory perhaps as the one suggested, but very much more poetic. Far back in the past, as the story relates, the projecting spur of Akaka, above the head of Manoa Valley, was united in marriage with the neighboring promontory Nalehua Kaka. A growth of lehua bushes still crowns the spur in perpetual witness of the union. Of this marriage of mountains twin children were born, a boy named Kahukani, which signified Manoa wind, and a girl called Kahukahini, which implied Manoa rain. At their birth, they were adopted by a chief and chiefess, whose names were Kolowahi and Pohakulukaa. They were brother and sister, and cousins also, of Akea. The brother took charge of the boy, and the sister assumed the custody and care of the girl. Reared apart from each other, and kept in ignorance of their close relationship, through the management of their foster parents, they were brought together at the proper age and married. The fruit of this union was a daughter, who was given the name Kala Laupuna, and who became the most beautiful woman on her time. Thus it was that the marriage of the wind, Kahakukani, and rain, Kahuakini, of Manoa, brought to the valley as an inheritance the rainbows and showers for which it has since been distinguished. To continue the story of the ancient bards of Oahu, Kalalopuna, or Kaha, as the name will hereafter be written, grew to a surprisingly beautiful womanhood. A house was built for her in a grove of sandal trees at Kaha'imano, where she lived with a few devoted servants. The house was embowered in vines, and two pololuo, or taboo staves, were kept standing beside the entrance, to indicate that they guarded from intrusion a person of high rank. Her eyes were so bright that their glow penetrated the thatch of her hale, and a luminous glimmer played around its openings. When bathing, a rosette halo surrounded her, and a similar light is still visible, it is claimed, whenever her spirit revisits Kala'imano. In infancy, Kaha was betrothed to Kahui, a young chief of Kailua, whose parents were so sensible of the honor of the proposed union that they always provided her table with poi of their own making, and choice of fish from the ponds of Kaiuni. The acceptance of these favors placed her under obligations to the parents of Kahui, and kept her in continual remembrance of her betrothal. Hence she gave no encouragement to the many chiefs of distinction who sought to obtain glimpses of her beauty, and annoyed her with proffers of marriage. The chief to whom she was betrothed was, like herself, of something more than human descent, and she felt herself already bound to him by ties too sacred to be broken. The fame of her beauty spread far and near, and people came from long distances to catch glimpses of her from lands adjoining, as she walked to and from her bathing pool, or strolled in the shelter of the trees surrounding her house. Among those who many times approached her dwelling, but failed to see her, were Kiwawakihele and Kumauna, two inferior chiefs, whose eyes were disfigured by an unnatural distension of the lower lids. In Eugenia's revenge, and envious of those who had fared better, they decked themselves with leis of flowers, and, repairing to the bathing place at Waikiki, boasted that the garlands had been placed around their necks by the beautiful Kaha, with whom they affected the greatest intimacy. Among the bathers at the popular resort was Kahui. Although the day fixed for his marriage with Kaha was near at hand, he had never seen her, this being one of the conditions of the betrothal. The stories of the two miscreants were repeated until Kahui at length gave them credence, and in a fit of jealous fury he resolved to kill the beautiful enchantress who had thus trifled with his love. Leaving Waikiki in the morning, he reached Kahaiamano about midday. Breaking from a pandanus tree a heavy cone of nuts, with a short limb attached, he presented himself at the house of Kaha. She had just awoke from a nap, and was about to proceed to her bathing pond, when she was startled at observing a stranger at her door. He did not speak, but from frequent descriptions she at length recognized him as Kuhi, and with some embarrassment invited him to enter. Declining and admitting his identity, he requested her to step without, and she unhesitatingly complied. His first intention was to kill her at once, but her supreme loveliness and ready obedience unnerved him for the time, and he proposed that she should first bathe, and then accompany him in a ramble through the woods. To this she assented, and while she was absent, Kahui stood by the door, moodily watching the bright light playing above the pond where she was bathing. He was profoundly impressed with her great beauty, and would have given half the years of his life to clasp her in his arms unsullied. The very thought intensified his jealousy, and when his mind reverted to the disgusting objects upon whom he believed she had bestowed her favors, he resolved to show her no mercy, and impatiently waited her return. Finishing her bath and rejoining him at the door, her beauty was so enrapturing that he was afraid to look at her face, lest he might again falter. It was therefore with his back turned to her that he declined to partake of food before they departed, and motioned her to follow him. His actions were so strange that she said to him, half in alarm, "Are you indeed angered with me? Have I in any way displeased you? Speak, that I may know my fault." "Why, foolish girl, what could you have done to displease me?" replied Kahui, evasively. "Nothing, I hope," returned Kaha. "Yet your look is cold and almost frightens me." "It is my mood today, perhaps," answered Kahui, increasing his pace to give employment to his thoughts. "You will think better of my looks, no doubt, when we are of longer acquaintance." They kept on together, he leading and she following, until they reached a large rock in Ihulama, when he turned abruptly, and seizing the girl by the arm, said, "You are beautiful, so beautiful that your face almost drives me mad, but you have been false and must die." Kaha's first thought was that he was making sport with her, but when she looked up into his face and saw that it was stern and smileless, She replied, "If you are resolved upon my death, why did you not kill me at home, so that my bones might be buried by my people? If you think me false, tell me with whom, that I may disabuse your mind of the cruel error possessing it. Your words are as fair as your face, but neither will deceive me longer," exclaimed Kahui, and with a blow on the temple with the cone of hala nuts, which he was still carrying, he laid her dead at his feet. Hastily digging a hole beside the rock, he buried the body and started down the valley toward Waikiki. He scarcely left before a large owl, a god in that guise, who was related to Kaha and had followed her, unearthed the body, rubbed his head against the bruised temple, and restored the girl to life. Overtaking Kahui, Kaha sang behind him a lament at his unkindness. Turning in amazement, he observed the owl flying above her head, and recognized the power that had restored her to life. Again ordering Kaha to follow him, they ascended the ridge dividing the valleys of Manoa and Nuuanu. The way was beset with sharp rocks and tangled undergrowth, and when Kaha reached the summit, her tender feet were bleeding and her pau was in tatters. Seating herself on a stone to regain her breath, with tears in her eyes she implored Kahui to tell her whither he was leading her, and why he had sought to kill her. His only reply was a blow with the hala cone, which again felled her dead to the earth. Burying the body as before, he resumed his way toward Waikiki. Again flying to the rescue of his beautiful and sinless relative, the owl god scratched away the earth above her and restored her once more to life. Following Kahui, she again chanted a song of lament behind him, and begged him to be merciful to one who had never wronged him, even in thought. Hearing her voice, he turned, and without answer, conducted her across the valley of Nuuanu to the ridge of Waolani, where he killed and buried her as he had done twice before, and the owl god a third time removed the earth from the body and gave it life. She again overtook her merciless companion, and again pleaded for life and forgiveness for her unknown fault, and yet, instead of softening his heart, the words of Kaha enraged him, and he resolved not to be thwarted in his determination to take her life. Leading her to the head of Kaihi Valley, where she was for the fourth time killed, buried, and resurrected as before, he next conducted her across the plains and steep ravines to Pokakia, on the Iwa slope of the Kala Mountains. He hoped the owl god would not follow them so far, but, looking around, he discovered him among the branches of a ohia tree, not far distant. As Kaha was worn down with fatigue, it required but a slight blow to kill her the fifth time, and when it was dealt to the unresisting girl, her body was buried under the roots of a large koa tree, and there left by Kahui, satisfied that it could not be reached by the owl god. Repairing to the spot after the departure of Kahui, the owl put himself to the task of scratching the earth from the body, but his claws became entangled with the roots, which had been left to embarrass his labors, and, after toiling for some time and making little or no progress, he abandoned the undertaking as hopeless, and reluctantly left the unfortunate girl to her fate, following Kahui to Waikiki. But there had been another witness to these many deaths and restorations of Kaha. It was a little green bird that had flitted along unobserved by either Kaha or her companion, and had followed them from Kahia Mano, flying from tree to tree and making no noise. Noting with regret that the owl god had abandoned the body of Kaha, the little bird, which was a cousin to the girl and a supernatural being, flew with haste to the parents of Kaha and informed them of all that had happened to their daughter. The girl had been missed, but as some of her servants had recognized Kahui and had seen her leave the house with him, her absence occasioned no uneasiness, and when the little green bird, whose name was Elapaio, recounted to the parents the story of Kaha's great suffering and many deaths, they found it difficult to believe that Kahui could have been guilty of such fiendish cruelty to the radiant being who was about to become his wife. They were convinced of Elapaio's sincerity, however, and with great grief prepared to visit the spot and remove the remains of Kaha for a more fitting interment. Meantime, the spirit of the murdered girl discovered itself to Mahana, a young chief of good address, who was returning from a visit to Waiani. Directed by the apparition, he proceeded to the koa tree, and, removing the earth and roots, discovered the body of Kaha. He recognized the face at once, notwithstanding the blood and earth stains disfiguring its faultless regularity. He had seen and become enraptured with its beauty at Kahimano, and on one occasion, which lived in his memory like a beautiful dream, he had been emboldened by his love to approach sufficiently near to exchange modest words and glances with it. Gently removing the body from the shallow pit in which it had been buried, Mahana found to his great joy that it was still warm. Wrapping it in his kihei, or shoulder scarf, and covering it with male ferns and ginger, he tenderly bore it in his arms to his home at Kamolili. As he walked, he chanted his love and scarcely felt his burden. Reaching home, he laid the body upon a kapamo, and earnestly implored his elder brother to restore it to life, he being a kahuna and having skill in such matters. Examining the body and finding that he could do nothing unaided, the brother called upon their two spirit sisters for assistance, and through their instrumentality the soul of Kaha was once more restored to its beautiful tenement. But it was some time before she fully recovered from the effects of her cruel treatment. Some time, in fact, before she was able to walk without support. In her convalescence, Mahana was her considerate and constant companion, and found no greater pleasure than in providing her with the delicacies to which she had been accustomed. She was greatly benefited by the waters of the underground cave of Maukai, to which she was frequently and secretly taken, and under the watchful care of Mahana, she was at length restored to health. With her recovery, in the home of her new friends at Kamolili, Kaha was introduced to a life that was new to her, but it was by no means an unpleasant change from the restraints of her listless and more sumptuous past behind the protecting shadows of her pululus, where she was jealously watched, and where rank closed her doors to congenial companionship. She repaired to an unfrequented beach, and, unobserved, played with the shifting sands and sang to the waves, and at night went with Mahana to the reef with torch and spear in search of fish and squid. Knowing that her restoration to life could not be long kept from her relatives, Mahana told her that his love for her was great and asked her to become his wife. "I shall never love anyone better than Mahana," replied Kaha, "but from infancy I have been betrothed to Kahui. My parents, the wind and rain of Mahona, have promised that I shall be his wife. While he lives, I can be the wife of no other." The argument that Kahui had forfeited all right to her by his cruelties failed to shake her resolution, and the brother of Mahana advised him to, in some manner, compass the death of Kahui. To this end they apprised the parents of Kaha of her restoration to life, and conspired with them to keep secret the information for a time. This they were the more disposed to do because of their uncertainty concerning what Kahui might again attempt should he find the girl alive. In pursuance of the plan adopted, Mahana learned from Kaha all the songs she had chanted to mollify the wrath of Kahui while she was following him through the mountains, and then sought the kilu houses of the king and chiefs in the hope of encountering his rival. It was not long before they met, under just the circumstances as Mahana desired. He discovered Kahui engaged with others in the game of kilu, and joined the party as a player. The kilu passed from the hand of Kahui to Mahana, who, on receiving it, began to chant the first of Kaha's songs. Surprised and embarrassed, Kahui, in violation of the rules of the game, stopped the player to inquire where he had learned the words of the song he was singing. The answer was that he had learned them from Kaha, the noted beauty of Manoa, who was a friend of his sister, and was then visiting them at their home. Knowing that she had been deserted by the owl god, and feeling assured that Kaha was no longer living, Kahui denounced as a falsehood the explanation of the player. Bitter words followed, and, but for the interference of friends, there would have been bloodshed. They met the next day at the kilu house, and in the evening following, when similar scenes occurred between Mahana and his rival Kahui, became so enraged at length that he admitted that he had killed the beautiful Kaha of Manoa, and declared that Kaha of Manhana to be an impostor, who had heard of the death of the real Kaha, and audaciously assumed her name and rank. He then challenged Mahana to produce the woman claiming to be Kaha, agreeing to forfeit his life should she prove in flesh and blood to be the one whom he knew to be dead, and subjecting Mahana to a like penalty in the event of the claimant proving to be other than the person he represented her to be. It had been the purpose of Mahana to provoke his rival to a combat with weapons, but the challenge of Kahui presented itself a more satisfactory means of accomplishing the object of his aim, and he promptly accepted it, and that both might be more firmly bound to its conditions, they were repeated and formally ratified in the presence of the king and principal chiefs of the district. The day fixed for the strange trial arrived. It was to be in the presence of the king and a number of distinguished chiefs, and Akaka, the grandfather of Kaha, had been selected as one of the judges. A moose had been erected near the seashore by the respective friends of the contestants, in which to roast alive the vanquished chief, and dry wood for the heating was piled beside them. Fearing that the spirit of the murdered girl might be able to assume a living appearance, and thus impose upon the judges, Kahui had consulted the priests and sorcerers of his family, and was advised by Ka'i to have the large and tender leaves of the ape plant spread upon the ground where Kaha and her attendants before the tribunal were to be seated. "When she enters," said the Kaulua, "watch her closely. If she is of flesh, her weight will rend the leaves. If she is merely a spirit, the leaves where she walks and sits will not be torn." On her way to Waikiki, the place designated for the trial, Kaha was accompanied by her parents, friends, and servants, and also by the two spirited sisters of Mahana, who had assumed human forms in order to be better able to advise and assist her, if occasion required. They informed her of Ka'i's proposed test with ape leaves, and advised her to quietly tear and rend them as far as possible for some distance around her, in order that the spirit friends beside her, who would be unable to do as much for themselves, thereby escape detection. If discovered, they would be exposed to the risk of being killed by the Popoyuhan, or spirit catchers. Arriving at Waikiki, Kaha and her companions repaired to the large enclosure in which the trial was to take place. The king, chiefs, judges, and advisors of Kahui were already there, and thousands of spectators were assembled in the grounds adjoining. The ape leaves had been spread, by the consent of the king, as advised by Kaia, and Kaha entered with her friends and advanced to the place reserved for them. Not far from her stood Kahui. As he bent forward in anxiety and looked into her star-like eyes with a sinking heart, he saw that their reproachful gleam was human, and knew that he had lost the wager of his life. Observing her instructions, Kaha took pains to quietly rend and rumple the ape leaves under and around her. So far as she was concerned, the test was satisfactory. The evidence of the leaves torn by her feet could not be questioned. Ka'i was therefore compelled to admit that Kaha was a being of flesh and bone, but in his disappointment he declared that he saw and felt the presence of spirits in some manner connected with her, and would detect and punish them. Irritated at the malice of the Kaulua, Akaka advised him to look for the faces of the spirits in an open calabash of water. Eagerly grasping at the suggestion, Ka'i ordered a vessel of clear water to be brought in, and incautiously bent his eyes over it. He only saw the reflection of his own face. Akaka also caught a glimpse of it, and knowing it to be the spirit of the seer, he seized and crushed it between his palms, and Kaia fell dead to the earth beside the calabash in which he had been peering. Akaka then turned and embraced Kaha, acknowledging that she was his granddaughter, and that her purity and obedience rendered her worthy of the love of the bold upland of Akaka, and of her parents, the wind and rain of Manoa. The curiosity of the king was aroused, and he demanded an explanation of the strange proceedings he had just witnessed. Kaha told her simple story, and Kahui, on being interrogated, could deny no part of it. As an excuse for his barbarous conduct, however, he repeated and attributed his jealous rage to the boastful assertions of Kuma'ana and Kiwawakihili. The slanderers were sent for at once, and on being confronted by Kaha, admitted they never had seen her before, and that they had boasted of their intimacy with her to make others envious of their good fortune. Well, replied the king, after listening to the confessions of the miscreants, as your efforts in exciting the envy of others have brought terrible suffering to an innocent girl, I now promise you something of which no one, I think, will envy you. You will be baked alive with Kahui. If you have friends among the gods, pray to them that the emus may be hot and your suffering short. The emus were ordered to be heated at once, and Kahui and the two calimentors were thrown into them alive and roasted. The first went to his death bravely, chanting a song of defiance as he proceeded to the place of execution, but the others vainly struggled and sought to escape. The retainers of Kahui were so disgusted with his cruelty to Kaha that they transferred their allegiance to her, and the lands and fishing rights that had been his were given to Mahana at once. And how do you intend to reward the young chief who hazarded his life for you? Inquired the king, pleasantly addressing Kaha as he rose to depart. With my own, O king, replied the girl, advancing to Mahana and laying her head upon his breast. So it shall be, indeed, returned the king. I have said it, and you are now the wife of Mahana. In his gratitude, the happy young chief threw himself at the feet of the king and said, I am your slave, great king. Demand of me some great service or sacrifice, that you may know that I am grateful. Even as you desire, returned the king. I will put you to a task that will tax to the utmost your patience. I listen, O king, said Mahana resolutely. The sacrifice I ask, resumed the king, with a merry twinkle in his eye, is that for full 3 days from this time you embrace not your bride. A sacrifice indeed, exclaimed Mahana, catching the kindly humor of the request and slyly glancing at the downcast face of Kaha. It is too great, I see, for one whose beard is not yet fully grown, interrupted the king. Will I withdraw the request? The girl is yours. Take her with you without conditions. Here the story of the trials of Kaha should end, but it does not. Sometime during the night following the death of Kahui, a tidal wave, sent by a powerful shark god, swept over and destroyed the emus in which the condemned men had been roasted, and their bones were carried into the sea. Through the power of their family gods, Kumankana and Kiwakihele were transformed into 2 peaks in the mountains back of Manawa Valley, while Kahui, who was distinctly related to the shark god, was turned into a shark. For 2 years, Kaha and her husband lived happily together, surrounded by many friends, enjoying every comfort. Her grandfather, Akaka, visited her frequently, and, knowing of Kahui's transformation and vindictive disposition, admonished her to avoid the sea. For 2 years she heeded the warning, but one day, when her husband was absent and her mother was asleep, she ventured with one of her women to the beach to witness the sports of the bathers and surf riders. As no harm came to the swimmers and the water was inviting, she finally borrowed a surfboard and, throwing herself joyfully into the waves, was carried beyond the reef. This was the opportunity for which Kahui had long waited. Seizing Kaha and biting her body in twain, he swam around with the head and shoulders exposed above the water, that the bathers might note his triumph. The spirit of Kaha at once returned to the sleeping mother, and informed her of what had befallen her daughter. Waking and missing Kaha, the mother gave the alarm, and with others immediately proceeded to the beach. The bathers, who had fled from the water on witnessing the fate of Kaha, confirmed the words of the spirit, and canoes were launched in pursuit of the shark, still exhibiting the bloody trophy beyond the reef. Swimming with the body of Kaha just far enough below the surface to be visible to the occupants of the canoes, the monster was followed to Waianae, where in shallow waters he was seen, with other sharks, to completely devour the remains. This rendered her restoration to life impossible, and the pursuing party returned sadly to Waikiki. With the final death of Kaha, her parents relinquished their human lives and retired to Manoa Valley. The father is known as Manoa Wind, and his visible form is a small grove of hua trees beneath Kaha'imano. The mother is recognized as Manoa Rain, and is often met with in the vicinity of the former house of her beloved and beautiful daughter. The grandparents of Kaha also abandoned their human forms. Akeka, resuming his personation of the mountain spur bearing his name, and his august companion nestling upon his brow in the shape of a thicket of lehua bushes. And there, among the clouds, they still look down upon Kahaiamano and the fair valley of Manoa, and smile as the rains of Kuahuahain, which day by day renew their beauty, and keep green with ferns and sweet with flowers, the earthy home of Kahaloa Puna.
Black Clock Audio Tales is edited and produced by D.B. Spitzer in Badger's Drift Studios in Portland, Oregon. You can contact us at pgttcm.com, on Facebook at Black Clock Audio Tales, and just look for us, Black Clock Audio Tales. Thank you.